as you know. Yeah, sorry for that. But back to where we started. Folk Mot Fossilmakta, that's a climate campaign. It was started last summer as a response to that the world had seen 12 months of over 1.5 degrees of warming. And as we all know in this call, I think that's the absolute limit what is considered safe for us as humans. So at the moment, we are trying to build up a campaign with the aim to mobilize people to take part in civil disobedience actions in order to expose the lies of the fossil fuel industry, expose the power of the fossil fuel industry. And a long-term goal is to push our governments to divest our pension fund from fossil fuel companies all around the world. I'm really excited for the call today. We have some amazing guests with us this evening. Dana and Ketan is joining us in a panel discussion. And the panel's aim is to touch on the power dynamics that are holding us back from creating the change we need to see, the fossil fuel roles in climate communication, and the use of civil resistance to challenge and counter the narratives that the fossil fuel industry are pushing in our societies. So first to Dana. That's the first guest I ever have had from America. That's an honor to have you here today. You are a sociologist and author, and you just wrote a very important book called Saving Ourselves. Yeah, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us what you're up to this in this crazy world these days?
Sure. Hi, I'm Dana Fisher. I have laryngitis. I don't usually sound like this. I'm very sorry. Hopefully you can still hear me. I am a sociologist. I'm a professor at the School of International Service at American University. I'm also the author of Saving Ourselves. And I will share, when I'm not done talking, a discount code if anybody would like it for 20% off the book. So the book itself talks about why we as individuals and collective citizens and people around the world need to push back to power to save ourselves, and lays out the argument for why we can't count on the state or the market to do the work for us. We have to do it ourselves. I lay out where we are, where we need to go, and present a lot of evidence based on research that I've done over the past 25 years studying the climate crisis, climate policy making, and climate activism, to talk about what we know and what we need to do. Because there's really hope in understanding the role that we all are going to play in saving ourselves from the climate crisis. Since Donald Trump won the election in 2024, my talks, I continue to do a lot of talks, usually with more of a voice. But when I've given talks, I've changed the title slightly so that I'm calling it now not just saving ourselves in time of crisis, but in times of polycrisis. Because what we're seeing, and certainly what we're experiencing here in the United States, is the crisis of the decline and attacks on democracy. And that affects the capacity for people power and for civil society to rise up and push back, because there is increasing criminalization and repression. And so that's a lot of what I've been talking about lately, and I'm happy to share my insights here. And many of you can think of this as a cautionary tale, but some of you can also think of it as hopefully providing insights for what you might experience.
Thank you, Donna. Yeah, like we are following the news like quite closely on what's happening in the States, and it's quite scary to see, especially the repression that the protesters are facing. So yeah, everyone that's speaking up right now, it's like a big courage. It takes a big courage to be able to speak up this time. So big shout out to all the people out there who is speaking up, even though they're facing big repressions. Our second guest today is Ketan, also a really important voice in the climate movement. He's based in Oslo, but he's from Australia. Researcher and climate communicator, and you're doing a great job in uncovering the insane amount of greenwashing that the fossil fuel industry are pushing out there. So who are you and what are you up to in this crazy world these days?
Yeah, I am, as you mentioned, I'm from Australia. I used to work in the renewable energy industry. That was where I started in Australia. So a bunch of wind farm companies. And then I discovered very quickly that I wasn't really that much into pure data analysis, and that I wanted to do politics and sort of, out there fighting on blogs and social media and on TV and things like that. So I kind of became a bit of a political campaigner, I guess, like not for political parties, but for issues like climate and energy. And I wrote a book called Windfall, which was published with the University of New South Wales, which was on two topics. It was on the community backlash against wind power development and sort of putting the blame on the companies that were building the wind farms, and then blending that with the politics at the time, who tried to basically exploit that community backlash. And then that sort of took me, pretty soon after I left that sort of area into corporate accountability. And so I have been working for about 3 years for a not-for-profit that is headquartered in Brussels, working on corporate accountability. I actually just left that role a few weeks ago. So now I'm a freelance writer, but I'm pretty much doing the same thing, which is just working on basically holding corporations to account for worsening the climate crisis. The past few years have been really focusing on greenwashing because there's just been a lot of that. There's been a lot of sort of a big time period of where companies felt the urge to talk about their climate credentials, but we're now shifting into a different phase. I can talk maybe a bit about this later on, but we're seeing more companies kind of just leaning into being openly evil and kind of, I call it vice signaling, which is basically actively saying we are digging up more fossil fuels and making the climate crisis worse in an effort to get more, shareholder confidence and win regulatory things through corruption and things like that. So it's kind of a different era, but the fundamental story is the same, which is a bunch of companies want to make the climate crisis worse for their personal gain and profits. So that's kind of what I'm currently working on, and I have a headache because there's a lot, there's a lot of it going on. But yeah, that's the whole trajectory at the moment.
Thank you, Ketan. Yeah, it's quite crazy when you start looking into it and you're realizing, it's just enormous. And at least in Norway, also looking at their state-owned oil company, like how much effort they're putting into portraying themselves as leaders. But in the end, they're also out there to make money. So that takes us to the panel discussion today. Adam is in Trondheim, also a part of Folk Mot Fossilmakta. He's going to lead the panel debate. So passing it over to you, Adam.
Yeah, just a few words about myself. So I'm volunteering in the Folk Mot Fossilmakta campaign. I've been doing so for a few years now. My background is not academic, so this is very much a side gig for me, thinking about these questions. But yeah, I'll try to take you through today. And I guess just picking up on some threads. Dana, you said we're in a polycrisis. Ketan, you're saying that we're now in a world where the fossil fuel companies are vice signaling instead of virtue signaling. So it's pretty scary. I think, Dana, I was listening to your TED Talk, which I recommend everyone have a listen to. And you said, we're more or less in an apocalypse, or you use this term apocalyptic optimist for yourself, which sounds a little bit contradictory. So what exactly do you mean by that? I was hoping you could elaborate.
Great. Yeah. So I call myself an apocalyptic optimist. And the reason I do so is that I believe that we can save ourselves from the climate crisis that we all created, but not all of us equally, obviously. But I also recognize the fact that we are on a current trajectory for the climate crisis to worsen. And anything that we do today, even if we could get all of these fossil fuel companies to stop extracting fossil fuels today and burning them, it would still take a while for the changes to happen. So we need to be prepared and recognize where we are. And so being an apocalyptic optimist means that I recognize things are going to get worse before they get better. And I talked about this in the book, specifically around climate change. Unfortunately, with the crisis to democracy, it's even more challenging because now we have this polycrisis of threats to democracy, threats to those people who are speaking out, along with this empowerment of the fossil fuel interests, which I think is what Ketan is talking about, but we're seeing it times like 1,000 in the United States, where the Trump administration just signed an executive order to stop woke policies against coal and fossil fuels, so that now coal needs to be privileged over other fossil fuels and other fuel sources when you think about policymaking. I mean, which is exactly the opposite. I mean, I don't know. You'll need a new term besides vice signaling. It's like evil doing or something. But basically, in this moment, being an apocalyptic optimist means recognizing all of the challenges that we're going to face to get to the other side of the climate crisis and being realistic about that. And one of the reasons I talk about this, and I do discuss this in my TED Talk and more at length in the book, is that one of the things that I think is really important to understand is we need to be realistic about where we are and where we're going. So many people, I mean, particularly in the United States, but in other places, had this idea that we had that the climate crisis was addressed and we had taken care of it with a small number of incremental policies. The Paris Agreement was going to do it all, which we all know is not true. And it's certainly not true now. And so I think that it's really important that we all have our eyes open about what the science says about where we're going, which means it's going to get worse before it gets better. Because when we don't recognize that, there are too many opportunities for misinformation and disinformation because people get caught off guard. And we saw that with extreme weather and climate shocks in the United States during the fires in California, as well as with the hurricanes that happened last fall, where people were told, no, it's not climate change. And there was all of this misinformation about what was causing it, and that it was the Biden administration creating hurricanes in North Carolina or water policies that are just not true. So really interesting time to be alive, but also an important time to be an apocalyptic optimist, I think.
And I just wanted to move on to the first part of the title of this talk, which is climate hypocrisy. And I guess, Dana, you also talk a lot about the power that the fossil fuel industry wields, that is actively pushing us against or pushing against us from doing anything about this apocalyptic situation that we're in.
And, for sure. I mean, sorry.
Yeah, please go. I was just wondering if you could comment. I mean, one of the first things you said when we contacted you about this panel was, you're an avid cross-country skier. You're a big fan of drawing attention to the hypocrisy of the sport, right? So you have companies like Equinor here in Norway funding winter sports. But, you have these really powerful industries that are just blatantly contradictory in the way that they're messaging from how they're acting and the huge amount of power. So I was just wondering if you could comment on that.
Sure. I mean, starting just from what you were just talking about, I mean, I think that this is all this virtue signaling and greenwashing that a lot of companies do, where they say, BP is beyond petroleum, or lots of there's a lot of fossil fuel interests and others who invest in green, like sports or green charities or small green projects where the majority of their money is being made, and they're spending their time figuring out how to extract more resources and burn more fossil fuels. And what I talk about in my work is the way that fossil fuel interests have this real privileged access to resources and power in all sorts of ways, but power, particularly political power, because of the ways that they have been given, a backdoor into policymaking. In the United States, it's particularly bad because they're able to basically pay to play, and they have so much more money. And what we know from research is that when fossil fuel interests support people who run for political office, even if they run on a climate policy, even if they say that they are all for regulating greenhouse gas emissions, stopping the climate crisis, at least limiting it, once they get into office, if they take fossil fuel money, they vote against climate policymaking, and they vote to curtail climate action. And that is part of the problem here, is that we see fossil fuel interests playing a role in domestic policymaking. They're all over the climate regime too. If anybody went to the recent rounds of climate negotiations, which I don't go to anymore, OPEC has a tent now. I mean, it wasn't bad enough that they would sneak in under like other titles. They now just have a tent. They're just saying the quiet part out loud. They are there, and they are there to protect fossil fuel interests.
Ketan, I want to bring you in now. We're talking a lot about the US and also international climate negotiations, but a lot of us are calling in from Norway. So I was just wondering what your take on this power is in Norway, and how fossil fuel companies are shaping the conversation here. I mean, I guess you partly built a name for yourself by debunking a lot of the claims that they make, and you have this kind of snarky tone. But what does it look like here? What is fossil fuel power in Norway? How does it manifest?
I take that as a compliment. I like I like being snarky about greenwashing because it's so much fun. It's fascinating, right? It manifests in different ways in different countries. So, where I'm from, Australia, greenwashing really manifests as a consumer-focused thing. So you get gas companies telling people that there are health benefits to looking at the flame on a gas heater inside your lounge room, and they have like fake scientific studies telling you that your brain is calmer when you're looking at the flame of like a gas flame, which is like sounds silly, but it's really focused on presenting gas as a clean, healthy, calming, safe thing inside your home. When in reality you're combusting a fuel inside your home and breathing in everything that's getting spewed out of it. Here it's really different. It's very much not a consumer based thing, and you can see that through Equinor's advertising efforts, right? It's all about the presentation of Equinor as an organization, particularly one that is future focused, one that is helping kids, one that is focused on education. I see Julie's on the call, so Klimakultur have done a lot of really good work on this type of thing. I recommend going to their website and looking at some of the work they do. But it's really fascinating because it sort of ensures that it's actually quite hard to take a company to like an anti-greenwashing board if the claim they're making is, oh, we funded some kids to play with Lego and learn about coding, right? Like you can't really take them to an advertising standards board and just say that's a lie, because it's not a lie. It's true. It's what they did. And so you can pull them up when they say, oh, we're a broad energy company and we sell all types of fuels, but you can't pull them up when they talk about the charity washing activities that they do. So it's a lot more well thought out here. And they're a lot more careful about it. And then just one other thing that's worth mentioning is something that I've kind of been a bit interested in the past year or so, is the way that fossil fuel companies present themselves in like professional climate spaces. So like climate conferences, right? Like these sorts of like, Dana mentioned COP, but there's also, you get like these kind of expensive events where, they're somewhere in Europe and you get like, the head of a big climate group that goes, but then you also get like the sustainability person from Shell, or like I don't know, someone from Occidental Petroleum talking about direct air capture, like carbon removal, that is. And so what they do is they really plug themselves into the sort of center corporatized, corporate-ish world of climate. And then they really embed themselves in there. They make friends, they talk about the good that they're doing. They basically say, we need to be part of this conversation. We're like good faith participants in resolving climate change. And it works astonishingly well, right? Like people believe it. And so it's a way of acquiring power, not just with like going and lobbying in government, but lobbying the climate movement directly. And they pick which parts of the climate movement they talk to. And so you get a lot of people defending fossil fuel companies saying, well, you shouldn't demonize them. You shouldn't cut them out of the conversation. They're kind of part of this. And often they've been spoken to, like it's a very direct, like interpersonal, charming interaction that they have. So it's kind of like, I'm not sure if soft power is the right word, but it's basically like a fascinating subculture of lobbying and the power of fossil fuel companies within the climate movement itself, which is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and I heard your talk with Julie, who's also on the call, the Klimakultur, and you were saying one thing that jumped out is how they're co-opting the language of activists too, which is quite frustrating, right? Because then they're kind of this trying to morph themselves into what the activists are, and then slightly twist the message and confuse things. But I just wanted to jump back to Dana for a minute, because perhaps I'm being a little unfair that you wouldn't know about the Norwegian context, because just before everyone jumped on the call, you were explaining that you've done a lot of research in Norway and that you've been here. One of the words that you used, at least in the Planet Critical podcasts that I listened to where you were interviewed, was the schizophrenia of the Norwegian state, which of course is tied with with Equinor, and just picking up on what Ketan said, that how can you fault them for funding children's events? So that's on the one hand, but on the other hand, they're digging out huge amounts of fossil fuels under the North Sea, right? And that, or yeah, basically on the continental shelf. So can you say a little bit about that? Like, what is the kind of vulnerability of the Norwegian state because of that schizophrenic nature to the kind of activism that Folk Mot Fossilmakta is doing?
Well, I think the thing is that it's interesting to think about targeting businesses, right? Particularly energy businesses. There is a way that they could play a role and that they could be legitimately part of the solution. And the problem is that there is this schizophrenic, or what I sometimes say is bipolar way that they talk about it, where sometimes they're like, we're all in on climate solutions. And then the next moment they're like, but we're going to identify more areas where we're going to extract more resources, because even though Norway is not going to consume these resources, we're going to sell them and make money to make Norway greener, which is what's been going on for the past 10, 15 years, right? So I think that I'm really interested in the way that they're capturing the language of activism, which is a really interesting tool that they use elsewhere. But I think that for targeting them and thinking about them, their weakness is the fact that they recognize, at least in Norway, that the people in Norway want them to be greener and they want there to be a solution to the climate crisis. And so that's their weakness. And so the big thing is for them to be able to make a legitimate claim. What needs to happen is they need to be actually proving that they are following through. It's great. Legos for children, wonderful. Putting up signs about caring about the environment, great. Helping to support, transitions to electric vehicles, also great. Not enough. So I think it's all about saying, the yes and pushing them to actually follow through on any type of claims they make, which we can't do with most American companies right now because they're empowered by the state in ways that they aren't over in Norway.
Okay, Frida, you've been very patient. Time to bring you in. I guess the campaign's been very successful in bringing to light this hypocrisy and forcing people to really re-examine it. Most recently through the action here in Trondheim with the Ski World Cup. And I think what's so amazing is that basically a small dedicated team of mainly volunteers is able to kind of create a national conversation. Equinor, I heard from the climaculture debate, has 150 full-time staff doing this, right? And that, you have these scenarios where a small number of volunteers that are just pushing in the right way are able to really bring up this hypocrisy. And so I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what happened here in Trondheim and with the athletes, and just also on the national stage, how this hypocrisy was surfaced through the actions of Folk Mot Fossilmakta.
Yeah, great. I'm not sure everyone is familiar with the whole story behind the action, so I will just quickly take people through. But yeah, it started the World Championship in skiing were held in Trondheim this year. And the organizers of the event were claiming that they had the ambitions to be the most sustainable world championship ever, which is quite a big claim. And you would think people who are organizing events like this were able to address the main driver behind the climate crisis, the burning of fossil fuels. They were not at all. They were only talking about electric vehicles and how we can reduce on a personal level, reduce our own carbon footprint and so on, the classic conversations. And the main sponsor of the event was, no, not the main sponsor, one of the biggest sponsors of the event was also our state-owned oil company, Equinor, which is not aligning with the ambitions to be the most sustainable world championship. So that's one thing. So the main, what we saw was this complete silence around the issues about the fossil fuels, but also a big problem that they were not also using, instead of not talking, they didn't just not talk about it, they were also using the platform, the World Championships platform, to really boost about Equinor as a leader in the green transition. So the leader of the World Championship organizer were going out and were really happy with Equinor sponsoring, because they were the leader in the green transition. They were really proud of working together with a company like this. And what we see is that they are withdrawing on their renewable investment. They're increasing the production of fossil fuels. So that's like, it's not just the silence, it's also like how they use like these important platforms in our societies. So in 2025, like I don't think this is acceptable anymore, and I think it's actually really, really dangerous that this is just happening. So we were a group of people in our campaign that thought that this should be exposed, and we should try to challenge both the organizers and in general our society about to think about the problems related to fossil fuel sponsorship. So what we did was that we publicly announced that we will peacefully disrupt the 50K race during the World Championship if the organizers were not willing to address the threat that fossil fuel industry are like is to the winter sports. So that got like really big media attention just by mentioning that we will protest, and it got us a meeting with the organizer a week later where we presented two demands to the organizer. We asked them to take away all the Equinor logos and also to play informational video about the fossil fuel treaty and the need for a global phase out on their screens.
Can you just say 2 words, Frida? That was a really good summary. One of the things that Dana says at the end of her book, she has these 3 recommendations for what the climate movement should do. And one of them was about creating community and real community and not just parachuting in and shouting at people. What was unique here, I think, is that there was actually links to the professional skiers within the group of activists. Can you just say 2 words about that? Like that you knew some of the skiers that signed the letter.
Yeah, so like we announced the action and we offered the organizer to like, okay, if you're not doing this, like if you're engaging with us, we will not disrupt. But they were just like, oh, we're not going to do it. So then we went forward with the plan to disrupt the race. But then we got in touch with some of the skiers. They were reaching out the hand and like, okay, how can we figure out this together? So due to like Callum's connection with one of the skiers, we ended up in a Zoom call during the World Championship where we were like, hey, what can we do about this together? And in that Zoom call, it's also like quite clear, like all the skiers are really worried too about the climate crisis, and we're basically worried about the same stuff. So we ended up coming to agreement where like 27 skiers signed like an open letter where they addressed the fossil fuel industry and the problem around sponsorship, and or agreeing to working together to address like this system, like this the ski federation, like the International Ski Federation, to work to come together, the climate campaigners and the skiers, to push for like a ban on fossil fuel sponsorship. So that was like the end of the action. Like instead of doing the disruption, we were enabled to engage with the skiers and find like a solution and work together going forward. And just right before I went into this call, there was someone posting a news article from like an American news something. Maybe you can post it in the chat, Callum. But no, it's like this, the conversation continues, and now today it's like 450 amateur athletes signing letters to go to the Olympics to represent their representatives, the people who are representing people in the Olympics, to also get the ban on fossil fuel advertisement. So this was like a really big success, and we really saw the power of civil resistance. A small group of people with no access to money and any power were just like saying, we're going to disrupt, and if not, you're taking this serious. So it was quite impressive to see that playing out perfectly well.
And super exciting. I know we're tooting our own horn a little bit. Thanks for being patient, Ketan and Dana. But Ketan, I wanted to bring you in because you're actually quite good at creating a lot of buzz as an individual, right? Like 150 people in Equinor, but you as an individual are able to create a huge amount of noise about the kind of hypocrisy and the lies that they're telling. But I just wanted to ask, I mean, to what extent, I mean, you're really good at this, but there's a few of you out there, right, that can do this, that have this talent. And is it really fair that we play by the same rules that they do? Like that we're on social media, that we're just critiquing each other's reports and information? Like, do we have to kind of change the rules of the game? And Dana says this, like, are we at a time where we need to actually engage and civil resistance and do things that the fossil fuel companies aren't able to do? I didn't know if you had a few words to say on that.
Yeah, she's totally right. I mean, I literally just earlier today, I was writing one of my daily blogs for covering the Australian election for a media outlet in Australia, and the it's like a debate between the two energy ministers of Australia, the government, and the one currently in government, and then the opposition. And it's an awful debate. It's really, they're kind of yelling at each other, and it's sort of not very pleasant to listen to. And the very first moment that the opposition leader stands up to start his opening statements, somebody stands up in the audience and just starts yelling. And I couldn't quite hear it. I sort of like they've got the microphones. It was coming through the microphone of the guy speaking, so you couldn't quite hear it. So then I immediately opened my Instagram, and I was like, I knew it was my friends. And it's these folks from Rising Tide. Rising Tide are a group in Australia who have been doing direct actions against politicians who are out campaigning at the Australian election. And it was just it was like such an important moment that I was like, I'm gonna make my vlog about this because this is more important than the statistics and the sort of debate and the lies, of the debate itself. It was the resistance of the person in the audience that I felt was the most compelling part of this very performative sort of dance that they do, and then the journalists themselves. So I guess this is the important part, is that this debate was sponsored by one of the biggest fossil fuel lending banks in Australia. And then, of course, you have a bunch of journalists in the audience who are there kind of smirking, like kind of laughing or shaking their heads at the people who are protesting. And that really, I see this a lot, right? Like whenever there's like a protest or anything like that at a media event in Australia, the journalists themselves are the ones who share the frustration or the annoyance that the politicians show, right? So the journalists are almost complicit in dismissing the voice of the activist and saying, why don't we get back to two people yelling talking points and facts and factoids and lies and stuff at each other, right? So the performance of the fake information, you don't want to get caught up in that, right? Like you don't want that to be, you don't want it to be like, oh, this person lied and this person told the truth and blah, blah, blah. Like that. That's just really a bad way of doing things. Whereas you have somebody standing up and saying, forget about the debate, forget about showing both sides, right? Start thinking about the urgency and the sheer physicality of the problem. And that's what the guy was yelling, right? Like he was yelling, stop fossil fuels, right? He wasn't yelling out like, introduce a tax on the emissions trading. Like he wasn't, he wasn't like proposing a policy, right? He was bringing it back to reality. And the people in the room obviously don't respond to that, right? Like they shake their head. They're like, oh, you're not really participating in this performance that we've set up here. But everybody watching it, right? Like that was part of the story. The media covered that. And then I really think that people watching it would have responded to the emotionality of that guy who stood up and yelled at them. It just feels really relevant to your question, right? Which is that you don't ever want to succumb to their frame from the outset, right? Like you don't want to spend your whole life debunking and arguing and going, oh, this was incorrect, just for the sake of saying that it's incorrect. It's always important to bring everything back to the physicality of the problem. And I think that's what protesters like Rising Tide and of course yourselves, like that's what you do so well, is that it's always about bringing it back to why anyone does this in the first place. And sorry, this is a long answer, but I just want to do one quick aside. I've been
Go ahead,
thinking
yeah.
a lot about this fossil fuel industry, but the climate movement itself, and the way we talk about things and like what we talk about. And this is just a little bit virtue of the fact that I'm from the energy industry, but I feel like a lot of the time that the climate movement itself has forgotten why we do the things that we do and why we care about the things that we do. So for instance, like some friends of mine, will write a report and it'll say something like, we had a lot of construction of solar panels in this region of the world, and that's a really, really good thing. Like it's a record number of new solar panels that are built. But then you open up the data and it's like emissions were also a record high, and it's like, but why are we building the solar panels? Like there's got to be a reason, right? It's not like we're not building renewable energy for the sake of it anymore. Like we're building it, and it comes from voices that have been, I would say, increasingly marginalized in climate spaces, like that group that I mentioned before, they don't get invited to speak at conferences in Australia, right? And I'm sure that it happens in other spaces like in Norway as well, right? They don't get space to talk about their experiences. They don't get space to talk about why they're doing what they're doing, because it's so easy to just forget about why you're doing this in the first place. So yeah, sorry, that's a long answer, but I hope that answers the question.
No, thanks. It's a great example. And I guess I was gonna address Dana with this because I know in places like the US and Australia, the stakes are really high for civil disobedience. So it's often nice to just be able to speak truth to power and stand up. I mean, you're not breaking the law as such. But some of the civil resistance that, at least in Norway, that groups have engaged in has involved blocking traffic or at least slowing down traffic. It's involved, painting artwork. It's involved, coming onto the stage of Norway, Shall We Dance, Frida? And I'm thinking about you. And that, I mean, I guess you're in those cases going to have state repression. And Dana, one of the things you talk about is how climate activists, can create this crisis of legitimation of the state. That basically you have all these people coming out and saying the state's not working in our best interest. They're allowing fossil fuels to continue to be burned, and they're basically undermining the basis of civilization. And that's all well and good. There's increased police repression, but I wanted to talk about a quirk of Norway, and that this repression is often quite hidden. So it's people getting fined, right? And that the Norwegian state is very smart about this. And it's kind of going back to what Ketan was saying, that that Equinor is very crafty too in its messaging. So how do we create that crisis if doing something really illegal just results in a fine? Like I mean, maybe it's too early days yet, but anyway, I'll leave it with you.
This is great. I mean, and I would just say that the description you were talking about with regard to this coalition that you all formed at the World Championships is a wonderful example of building a coalition of solidarity. Can you all hear me okay? I'm sorry about my voice. Okay.
Okay.
With regard to your question, though, about civil disobedience, I would just say that, I mean, in some ways, there are these opportunities that are opening up because of the repression we're experiencing in the United States, because research shows and history tells us that when there is repression to nonviolent people engaging in civil disobedience, it actually expands people who join the movement, and it builds solidarity for people who are sympathizers. So that's number one. So in some ways, you want repression, but on the other hand, without repression, you can use the activism to create what we call issue salience, with more and more people will be like, you know what, that's right. The climate is changing. I notice it in my garden. I notice it because of the ski, the times that I can ski. And it can help actually expand the movement that way as well. So either way works. There are these moments in terms of getting to the point where there's a legitimation crisis in the state that you need a critical mass demanding social change. It's easier to get there when there is repression. It's easier to get there when there is extreme crisis, which could come also from climate shocks as we experience more and more of the effects of the climate crisis. But either way, I think we'll get there. It's an easier road for the people in a place like Norway, where the state is right now being very subdued and respectful in its way of trying to limit people doing this type of disruption. I don't think that they'll stay that way, to be honest. I think that they will eventually start to try to push back as more and more people are disrupting things, events, social occasions, etc.
And Frida, I wanted to jump back to you now. We're kind of at an interesting crossroads now with activism, at least in Europe, right? So we had initially XR, Fridays for the Future, mass mobilization, some civil disobedience, but mainly congregating in streets, more of a festival atmosphere that morphed into this April 2022 set of campaigns that then, had a more committed core of activists that were willing to kind of push the boundaries more when it came to climbing up on highway gantries or blocking major highways, throwing soup on the protective covers of priceless artwork, so on and so forth. But I think it was last week that Just Stop Oil said, we're done, right? And, in typical Paul Engler fashion, they declared victory and ran. Take it or leave it. But what does resistance look like now in 2025? Does it take on a more extreme form? Like Dana is saying that, the state's maybe not going to stay as kind to activists. Do the activists need to push the envelope? Does it need to be something closer to the mass mobilization from which it grew out of? I'm just wondering how you feel now at this crossroads that we're at. And it's not just Stop Oil, I should say, it's also Adderstall Vattmarker, Protect Our Wetlands, and in Sweden and some of the other major A22 campaigns are drawing to a close.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, like I think compared to if we see like those campaigns you were mentioning now, like compared to like Just Stop Oil, compared to the whole population of UK, is like quite fairly small. So I think it still goes back to that we all need to acknowledge that all of us, all the people in this call, have the power to create change, and that we also are like we all have a responsibility in this time. Like we are the generation who can actually, like what we're doing today is going to determine our future. So I think the climate movement and all the social movements who's working for the common good, we need to really like learn how to systematically mobilize people into action. And because we know if we're able to gather enough people, we are actually able to challenge like the fossil fuel industry and build like real pressure on the state to engage with the best of all of us, and not engage with what's the need for the fossil fuel industry to earn more money. So I think it comes back to the craft of mobilization and gathering people and building coalitions. Because there is a lot of people out there who wants to take part and wants to do good in the world, but we really, as a movement, Folk Mot Fossilmakta speaking here, we really need to create good pathways for people to get involved, to take action. And we need to recognize that like social movement is not just happening, like we're building them. And first of all, we need to learn how to build them. And I think what we have been seeing in Europe now, like from Axar to Just Stop Oil and all these campaigns, everything is building on each other. And like we see what that campaign did, what can we do better, and what can we do better each time, and like slowly building the capacity we need so that we are in the moment when we're facing with so much social stress in our societies, that we as the public and the normal people are able to use those moments and being able to push the society in the direction of the common good, not for only the richest people. So I think it's really about like creating this craft and skills to mobilize and organize ourselves. And secondly, it's like the repression, like we see crazy repression around Europe and the United States right now. Like people are facing 5 years in prisons for taking part in disruptive actions in the UK. Like people we know from our own network are like locked up right now in this moment. The same in Germany, like our sister campaign, like they're like the state consider them as like a terror organization, and they risk the same penalties as ISIS, for instance. And that's a lot of young people just standing up for their future with demanding climate action from the state. So we need to be able to push through when we see this repression. And in order to be able to do that, it again comes down to community. We need to build alliances and strong communities that are holding each other's back and like fighting together, because none of us are able to do it alone. But if we're coming together as a collective and demand change, we have to see like that's what we have to do. And we know, as you said, Dana, like the climate change is not going to get away. Like it's going to be worse and worse and worse. And at some point, we need to take a decision. Who am I in this situation, and what should I do in this situation?
And I just see so many parallels between what Dana's saying and what you're saying, and just the idea of like capitalizing on climate shocks or trigger events, having people mobilized, ready to respond. And then also just this point of not only building community, but also resilience, because this is going to be a long struggle to and trying to institutionalize some of the changes, or at least leaning in on institutions to make sure that we have durable, long-lasting campaigns and change. Okay, I know we went over it. The audience is being very shy. I've seen a lot of comments, but I don't know if I've seen any questions. We did reserve a few minutes from questions because I'm sure there's probably interesting stuff that we're not asking. Okay, so we can maybe take one or two. Frida's going to close off, so we just need to leave a little time for her to talk about the campaign and its plans. Do you want to, can you just write it in the chat quickly? Or is it too much effort to do that? Just because others might have questions too, but they might be too shy to speak out loud. We can just quickly collate. But yeah, I also just, while people are writing in, Ketan, I wanted to ask, because you seem to kind of know the most about how the minds of these PR people in fossil fuels work in Norway. How might they respond to all these activists? Like how can you help us anticipate? Like, I mean, of course, there's the othering, right? They're not like us. They have tattoos or piercings or colored hair, and they just like hiking and they don't have jobs. But is there any kind of like more sophisticated response? And Julia and Marty, please write in your questions and we can get to them.
Yeah, I'll keep it short because we don't have too much time, but it's just in Norway, it very much, and of course, you know, I feel like I'm just speaking a little bit not from experience here. So this is really more just hearing from other people and seeing the way corporations react to activism and things like that. But recently, I really actually can't remember which group it was now. I'm so sorry to whoever it was, but it was an action where some refuse from floods was literally placed in the backyard of the CEO of Equinor.
I think that was Greenpeace,
It
yeah.
was Greenpeace, yeah, and so normally, you know, the reason I was so fascinated seeing this is because in Australia there was an action where a group called Disrupt Burrup Hub, which is a very large gas field in Australia. They spray painted they planned to spray paint the outside wall of the CEO, and the cops turned up. Like 20 to 30 cops were there waiting for them. And it turned into this huge, horrible thing where they all got really punitive sentences. And I was sort of fascinated to see the responses, not just from the state itself, but from specifically from Equinor, from the CEO. In Australia, when it happened to the CEO was like, I felt really scared. I was very unsafe. You know, the activists were threatening me. They came to my home and they were really threatening me. And it was so strange seeing the reaction to the Equinor CEO, who was essentially like, yeah, yep, they dumped some stuff in my yard. Like it was really strange and muted and very much not attacking the activists themselves. And
Yeah,
so I thought that was just an interesting demonstration. Yeah.
they might hold back. Okay, we just got lots of questions come in. Thanks for killing some time here. Oh God, it's hard to summarize because they're quite different. We see Callum's asking how do we get more famous people involved? How do we get, Julie's asking how do we get climate activists in the media and in the climate debate? Ketan, you were saying how they're often sidelined or they're not invited. And then Mari has quite a long question. Let's see. Climate shocks really shock people into action. That's a good one. The weather is just going to go back to normal, or it's actually the government that's causing the climate change, not the fossil fuel companies. Anna has a...
Can I speak on that one?
Yeah. Go ahead. This is like a minute for you, or a
Yeah,
story.
no, I mean, these are all great questions, but I'm going to answer the Marion's question just because I was just on the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, had a specific panel last week that I was participating in where they were talking about extreme weather and climate attribution. And I was on a panel that was specifically on the social side of that. And in it, we were talking about recent research that shows that people who experience climate shocks, their attitudes change. And it opens these windows of opportunity where they are more likely to support climate science and climate action, no matter their political ideology. Now those windows close and misinformation that can come in and ruin that relationship. But there is a relationship there that can be exploited and taken advantage of. And that action that Ketan was describing of taking the garbage or whatever it is, the whatever the stuff that comes in from like a flooded
Debris
river.
yeah.
Debris, thank you. Taking that and putting it in somebody's yard or putting it in the middle of the road or using it to shine a light on the disaster that comes from these climate shocks is a great way to draw more attention, because it's the people who experience it where the research says it actually does make a difference.
Yeah,
and the
I guess
research is just starting to look at these examples from Texas, Florida, and there are some from Germany just coming out.
I just wanted to emphasize the last points of the question, which, it maybe comes from a position of privilege, saying we need to rely on these shocks, because I think a lot of people on this call will be insulated from them. So how do we make sure they don't just impoverish more people? So just to add that point, Anna's second.
That's where resilience comes in for sure. Building resilience in communities so that people don't get left behind.
Emphasis too coming on polycrisis, and then did any of you want to respond to the famous people or to the getting activists in the spotlight in the media, or maybe
Can I just quickly respond to that? I'll keep it really, really short. But I've worked with some former colleagues at a place I used to work at, and other folks who work on getting climate into arts and culture, and specifically into films and TV shows. And so it's like such a tightrope. I recommend looking up the work of people who are working on this. So there's Anna Joyner in the US, among some others. And what they do is they basically go to Hollywood and they say to actors, like, you need to start talking to your producers and scriptwriters about getting climate as an issue. So it's not just having a celebrity post on their Instagram. There's this whole new movement around getting people to integrate it into the very fictions that they're creating and putting out into the world. And it's just absolutely incredible, fascinating stuff. So I recommend digging into that if you have time.
Nice, like some more Don't Look Up films. Great.
Wait, can I just add one thing?
Yeah, please, Dana.
So I'm actually working with a group called Peak Action, which is a production company, on the documentary for Saving Ourselves. It's extremely hard to get greenlit projects greenlit. That's the right way to say it. Right now, because even though everybody is saying, let's have a meeting and talk about climate content, very few production companies in the United States or in Europe are actually being willing to invest in it, because they don't know that it's marketable unless you have, another Don't Look Up. So there's a need for more pressure and more demand for it.
Great. I think we have to call it quits there. Frida, I've left you with very little time to wrap. If our speakers need to run, because I know you're very busy, you can. But Frida, I think you just had some important words to say about the campaign and making sure that people register who've attended that want to continue to work on these issues.
I only had 3 minutes, so I should be short. But Folk Mot Fossilmakta, we are constantly working and doing things better and working on mobilizing and taking action. So our next plans is actually happening in Bergen during Festspillene, which is a major musical and event, and the main sponsor is Equinor. And the last years, the Equinor logo has been flagging all around the city. So we're going to be there and make clear that we're disagreeing with the sponsorship, and that Festspillene should also take on responsibility in this crisis we're in, and that the culture and the art scene is really important to lift this conversation and have this conversation and facilitate them in the society. So we're going to be there and put some pressure on there. So stay tuned for that. Also back to what I said, like we need to be systematically mobilize people, and we have an amazing tool for that right now. It's like a new software developed by our sister campaign in Germany. So before we're leaving this call, I encourage everyone to take 1 minute now to fill out the participation form from this call. It's really important for us to be able to follow up on people, and especially people who wants to engage in the campaign. So please fill out the form, and we will get in touch with the people who wants to continue and working with us. But also, if you're just like interested to following from the side, please sign up. And yeah, that's what we need. We need to collect data and follow up on people and do it good. So you have time to fill out that. And I will also add that on Monday we're having like a Zoom call, a launch where we launch the strategy for the next 6 months. So also, if you're interested to get more involved, I will recommend you to pop by and say hi and meet other people who is active in this space. And just to add, like, it's not only about taking action. We're spending so much time in organizing, talking to people, building alliances, and it's so much behind the scenes that's going on. So we need everyone to help out. And big thank you to Ketan and Dana who spent the time, and Adam for facilitating. And yeah, hope to see you around and yeah, continue the fight wherever you are.